Thanksgiving at our house always came with an agenda though, no one ever said it out loud. The turkey was perfectly golden, the wine glasses sparkled, and Dad's stories flowed like champagne. And just like every year, he found a way to bring her up, my sister, the crown jewel. "Your sister just bought a gorgeous home," he announced, like he was revealing royalty. "When will you catch up, Stella?" Everyone laughed. Except me. I didn't flinch. I didn't sip my wine or look away. I just smiled. Calm, direct. "I did," I said. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." The room went still. Forks paused midair. Eyes snapped toward me. And in that moment, everything they thought they knew about me started to shift. There's something almost theatrical about the way Thanksgiving unfolds in our house. Every detail feels rehearsed, like we're all actors hitting our marks on a set that hasn't changed in decades. The dining table is always dressed the same. Cream linen, crystal stemware, silverware, polished like heirlooms. Mom moves with military precision between kitchen and dining room, adjusting a napkin here, fluffing a pillow there. She smiles through it all, but it's the kind of smile that says, "Stay in character." Dad plays his part-toothed charismatic host with a booming voice and a memory full of anecdotes. Only his stories are never really about the whole family. They orbit around one person. My sister. Kara. She doesn't even try to downplay it anymore. She walks into the room like it's a red carpet. High heels, perfect blowout, designer coat. And why wouldn't she? Every time she enters, the spotlight finds her. And me? I'm Stella, the one who brings wine and carries the folding chairs in from the garage, the one who listens more than she speaks, who always gets asked, "Still working that same job?" Or, "Did you ever finish that certification thing?" They don't mean to be cruel. At least, I don't think so. But the questions aren't really questions, they're placeholders. A polite way to skip over the parts of me they don't understand. Or worse, don't want to understand. It's always been like this. Kara gets the big moments. Graduation speeches, engagement toasts, housewarming announcements. I get nods, smiles. Sometimes an extra helping of pie, as if that somehow makes things equal. I used to pretend it didn't bother me. I told myself I didn't care, that I was taking the high road, staying humble. But deep down, I felt it every year like background music I couldn't turn off. This year, though, something had shifted. Not in them. In me. I hadn't come to prove anything. I hadn't come to show off. I came because I knew exactly who I was, and, more importantly, I finally understood who they were. So when Dad raised his glass and made that announcement, it didn't land the way he expected. And when he turned to me with his usual grin and asked when I'd catch up, well, that's when everything changed. Kara had always been the one who got it right. From kindergarten art shows to college applications, she collected praise like trophies. By the time she was 28, she had a husband, a mortgage, and a picture-perfect Instagram feed with golden filters and just the right amount of effortless charm. Dad called her sharp as a tack. Mom called her our little powerhouse. The rest of the family? They didn't bother hiding the admiration. At family gatherings, she didn't have to ask for attention. It just formed around her like gravity. A compliment here, a question there. How's the new marketing role? Did you redecorate again? Didn't you just get back from Paris? She knew how to work a room, smiling, modest laughing, brushing it off like it was no big deal. But she loved it. You could tell. And I was the afterthought. If Kara bought a new home, I was still renting somewhere, right? If Kara got promoted, I was figuring things out. If Kara had a bridal shower, I was the one folding napkins and ordering cupcakes. Dad didn't do it out of malice. I really believe that. But he carried this idea of success, like a checklist stand. Kara ticked every box in permanent ink. Once, at a barbecue, he patted her shoulder in front of everyone and said, "Now this is what building a future looks like." I'd just gotten a new client contract that week. No one asked about it. Sometimes I wondered if I was invisible, or if I just made it easier for them not to see me. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted recognition, the kind that doesn't come with applause but with understanding. But I also knew Kara wasn't evil. She didn't ask for the pedestal. She just stood on it, because no one ever questioned if she belonged there. And part of me, maybe a small, tired part, started to believe I didn't. Until I stopped playing along. Because the truth was, I hadn't just caught up. I'd surpassed everything they assumed about me. I'd worked in silence, built something stable, something mine. And I'd done it without a single borrowed cent or Instagram-worthy caption. They didn't know that yet, but they would. Soon. It didn't happen overnight. The change, I mean. There was no grand revelation, no life-altering moment. Just a slow, steady awakening. A quiet series of choices that added up until one day, I looked around and realized I was no longer waiting for anyone's permission to matter. It started the year I skipped Thanksgiving. I told them I had a work deadline, that I couldn't fly home. But really, I just didn't have the energy to sit at that table again and pretend I was fine with being second tier. I spent that evening alone in my apartment, eating Thai takeout in leggings, watching strangers on TV have heartwarming reunions. It should have been depressing. It wasn't. It was peaceful. That silence, the absence of expectations, gave me room to breathe. And in that stillness, I started doing things for Menno, for their approval, not for comparison. I took the freelance work no one believed in, and turned it into a steady income. I launched a consulting business, and landed my first retainer client after 3 months. I moved out of the tiny walk-up, and bought a house quietly, methodically, without telling a soul. I didn't post about it, didn't throw a party, no housewarming photos, no curated tours. It wasn't secrecy, was sacred, it was mine. And every time I crossed another milestone, I imagined what Dad might say if he knew. Would he be proud? Would he act like he expected it all along? But then I'd remember. He never asked. Not once did he call to check in on my progress. Never asked how the business was going, if I needed advice, or even just a, "How are you holding up?" when I disappeared from family events for almost 2 years. It used to sting. Now, it just told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't on their radar because I didn't fit their formula. My life didn't look like Kara's, so to them, it didn't count. They only saw loud winds rings, houses, vacations. But I'd built something stronger, a life that didn't need applause to feel real. And when the invite came for this year's Thanksgiving, I almost declined again. But something in me said, no, go. Not to prove anything. Not to compete. Just to finally stop shrinking in a room I never should have felt small in to begin with. So I went. I put on a burgundy sweater, brought a bottle of Pinot Noir, and walked into that house like I belonged. Because this time, I wasn't there to blend in. I was there to be seen. Dinner was already in full swing by the time I arrived. The table looked exactly as I remembered, candlelight dancing across polished silver, gravy boats steaming, laughter floating between wine refills and polite stories. The roles were all in place. Dad at the head, carving the turkey like a general, Mom flitting between dishes, refilling things that didn't need refilling, Kara glowing effortlessly in the seat beside her husband, Trevor, who laughed just a little too hard at Dad's jokes. I took the empty seat at the far end, across from my cousin Abby. She gave me a warm smile and whispered, "You look amazing." I mouthed thank you and folded my napkin onto my lap, already bracing for what I knew was coming. It happened right after the pie was served, pecan, Dad's favorite. He dabbed the corner of his mouth with a napkin, leaned back, and, right on cue, raised his voice just enough to gather the room's attention. "Well, your sister has some big news," he announced proudly, looking toward Kara with a grin that bordered on smug. She just closed on a gorgeous new home. 4 bedrooms, a wrap, a round porch, granite everything. "Oh wow," Aunt Carol gushed. "That's amazing, Kara," chimed in Trevor's mom. "She's just always ahead of the curve," Dad added, then his voice light, but pointed turned toward me. "Stella, when are you going to catch up, huh?" There it was. I felt every eye turn toward me, some amused, some expectant. Even Kara tilted her head, like she was waiting to see if I'd give one of my classic vague answers. For a second, I just looked at Dad. Not with anger, but with something quieter. Something that made him shift in his chair before I even opened my mouth. I smiled. Not bitter, not forced. Just settled. I did, I said evenly, my voice cutting clean through the hum of the room. Dad blinked. You did? I reached for my water glass, took a sip, then looked around slowly. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. That was the moment. It didn't explode, it landed. A silence fell across the table, not loud, but sharp. Kara's fork hovered midair, Trevor's brow furrowed slightly. Aunt Carol looked confused, like she missed a punchline. But I didn't explain. I didn't rush to fill the space. For once, I let them sit in it. Let them feel what it was like to not already know my story. It's strange how powerful one sentence can be, not because it's loud, but because it breaks something open. I did. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. I hadn't meant for it to land like a grenade, but the silence that followed told me it had. Dad's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Kara lowered her fork slowly, her lips parted just enough to show surprise. Even Mom, who usually stayed out of these exchanges, paused mid-pour of sparkling cider. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile to soften it. I just sat still, letting the moment stretch, letting it breathe. Dad gave a short laugh, one of those tight, dismissive ones he uses when someone steps out of line. Well, he said, waving a hand like he was brushing away a fly. That's cryptic. It's not, I said calmly. You asked a question. I answered it. He glanced around the table like someone trying to reclaim control of a room that had quietly slipped away. So, what? You've bought a house? His tone made the word house sound exaggerated, like it was an inside joke I wasn't in on. I have, I replied, taking a sip of wine. About a year ago, actually. Mom blinked. A year? She echoed. Why didn't you say anything? I guess, I said, meeting her gaze. It never came up. The words landed like a quiet verdict. Not cruel. Just true. I could see Kara processing it now, mentally scanning for clues she'd missed. I hadn't posted it online. I hadn't invited anyone. There were no welcome mats, no just closed selfies. Because it wasn't for them. And that, I think, was the part that unsettled them the most. Trevor cleared his throat. Where is it? He asked, trying to sound casual. About 20 minutes from here, I said, turning to butter a roll like it was any other Tuesday. Dad chuckled again, this time more forced. So, what's the square footage on this mystery house of yours? I looked him in the eye, even, steady. Just over 4,000. The room inhaled in unison. Aunt Carol made a soft, oh, sound. Kara blinked once. Even Trevor's expression shifted, like he wasn't sure whether to be impressed or uncomfortable. Dad leaned back slightly. That's a lot of space for someone on their own. I shrugged. Maybe, but I paid in full, so it's not exactly a burden. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was adjusting. Like the room was slowly recalibrating everything they thought they knew about me. And I let it. Dad didn't speak right away. He just stared at me with that polite, puzzled look people give when they're trying to decide whether to laugh something off or dig deeper. Kara, meanwhile, had frozen her pie untouched, her expression carefully neutral, like someone trying not to blink during a poker hand. You paid in full? Dad finally asked, voice low, skeptical. I nodded. Every cent. No mortgage. Trevor let out a soft, involuntary, wow. Kara shot him a quick glance. I've been building this for years, I continued. Just not publicly. The tension shifted like a slow-moving fog across the table. The kind that didn't scream, but lingered in people's throats. Kara tried to reclaim ground. That's great, Stella, she said, her tone sugary, sweet. But buying a house is a big deal? You didn't want to share that with your family? I turned to her calmly. You mean the family that only ever asks how close I am to being like you? Her smile faltered. I didn't hide it out of spite, I added. I just didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. There was no raised voice, no sting, just clarity. Dad tried again. So what kind of work are you doing now? I thought you were freelancing. I was. Now I run my own consultancy. I have 6 clients under retainer. Mom finally broke her silence. 6? She asked. Not disbelief, something more fragile, like realization. I nodded. I've been financially independent for a while now. Dad shifted in his chair. Well, Kara's house is in a fantastic neighborhood. Great schools, great investment. Trevor nodded robotically. Kara sat a little straighter. Oh, totally, I said lightly, although technically it's not her name on the deed. The room paused like someone had hit a mute button. Kara's expression cracked for the first time. Excuse me? It's just what the records show, I said. Trevor signed the mortgage. It's public info, you know. Registry of Deeds. Trevor's face flushed. We're married, he said quickly. It's our house. Of course, I said, voice neutral. But we both know how banks work. Kara's jaw tensed. Why would you even look that up? I didn't, I said. Someone sent it to me months ago. Said it was funny how I was always the one being compared when I was the only one not owing a bank anything. Dad held up a hand. Okay. This is getting out of hand. No, I said, still calm, still centered. It's not. It's finally honest. And that was when I saw it. The flicker of something behind Dad's eyes. Not anger. Not disappointment. Doubt. For the first time, he wasn't sure who the golden child at the table really was. Kara crossed her arms, her voice tight. I never asked to be compared. I nodded. Neither did I. But it happened anyway. Every holiday, every birthday, every backhanded compliment. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I wasn't attacking. I was just done pretending. I built something real, I said. I just didn't need an audience to clap for me along the way. No one moved. Not yet. But something in the air had cracked open, and for the first time, I wasn't the one being explained away. Dad looked like he wanted to say something to regain control, but the words wouldn't come. Kara, on the other hand, had gone rigid, her hands clenched under the table. Her voice, when it came, was low and tight. You know, she said, for someone who didn't want attention, you sure timed this pretty perfectly. I tilted my head. I didn't time anything. You asked when I'd catch up. I simply answered. Trevor shifted uncomfortably beside her. Let's not make this a competition. It's always been a competition, I said gently. Just one I wasn't told I was in. That hit hard. Even Mom's eyes flicked toward Kara with something uncertain behind them. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I continued, my voice steady. I worked 12-hour days for nearly 3 years. I didn't go on vacations. I didn't go into debt. I built my business client by client, staying up until 2 in the morning designing proposals and doing my own taxes. I looked around the table. No one asked. Not once. Aunt Carol blinked. You skipped 2 Thanksgivings in a row, didn't you? I nodded. And no one called. No one checked in. You just assumed I was drifting, that I was still the one behind. Kara scoffed quietly. So what? You wanted applause? A parade for doing your job? No, I said. I wanted a family that didn't measure my worth by how closely I mirrored your life. Her face flushed, lips pressed into a thin line. I never claimed to be better, I added. But you all made it very clear I was somehow less. And I believed it until I realized your standards had nothing to do with me. You praised milestones you could measurings, square footage, curated lives on social media, but not resilience, not risk, not growth in silence. Dad finally spoke, his voice low, unsure. Why didn't you just tell us? I looked at him. Because it wouldn't have mattered. You already decided who I was a long time ago. You put me in a box labeled still trying, and never looked inside. He inhaled sharply. That's not fair. It's not about fairness, I said. It's about pattern. Then I turned to Kara. You're not the villain, you know, but you've never once used your voice to shift the spotlight. You stood there and soaked in all the praise without asking why it was always so one-sided. Kara stared at me, something flickering in her eyes. Guilt? Defensiveness? Maybe both. I didn't know, she said quietly. You didn't ask, I replied. And you never wondered why I stopped showing up. Mom's eyes were glossy now. Her voice wavered. Stella, I didn't realize. I know, I said gently. That's the problem. And there it was. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was the weight of years collapsing. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. The room didn't go back to normal. There was no awkward joke to cut the tension. No quick subject change. Just silence thick and honest, like the kind that follows a storm you didn't see coming. Kara looked down at her plate, her expression unreadable. Trevor sat rigid beside her, like he was afraid any movement might trigger something. Mom dabbed at her eyes, her lips pressed together like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling completely. And Dad? He looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just unsure. Like the foundation he'd stood on for years had shifted beneath his feet, and he wasn't quite sure where to step next. I reached for my napkin and folded it neatly, carefully. There was no anger in my movements, no need to prove anything anymore. That moment had passed. I wasn't here to win. I never had been. I think I'll head out, I said quietly, standing up. Stella, Mom started, but didn't finish. I looked at her, not cold, not hurt, just done pretending. You always asked me to come back, but never asked how I was doing, I said gently. You wanted updates you could brag about, not the truth of who I was becoming. Her mouth parted, then closed again. I turned to Kara next. We don't have to be close, but it would have meant something if just once, you had pulled me aside and asked me how I was really doing. No filters, no audience. Kara didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered with something I hadn't seen before. Recognition. And Dad, I saved him for last. You wanted me to catch up, I said, but I was never behind. You just never looked. His shoulders sagged slightly. You're right, he said, almost inaudibly. I didn't need more than that. I walked toward the door slowly, slipping on my coat as I went. No one followed, no one called my name. And that, strangely, felt like closure, not because they didn't care, but because they finally understood they didn't own the version of me they had created. I opened the front door. The evening air was crisp, biting, but it felt good on my skin. Outside this house, I wasn't the one who needed to catch up. I wasn't the quiet girl in the corner or the disappointment in progress. Out here I was just Stella, the woman who had already arrived. And for the first time in years, I didn't need anyone to follow me out.